Hello, welcome. I know a lot of you are here because you're trying to fall asleep. Maybe you're lying in bed right now, phone in hand, looking for something to ease your mind into darkness. I want you to know something before we begin. This channel isn't monetized. There are no ads here, no interruptions, just my voice and these stories. If you appreciate that, if this helps you in some way, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. And if you're comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I like knowing you're out there, wherever you are, listening in the dark. Now, let's begin. I used to work the overnight shift at a storage facility just outside of Bakersfield. It wasn't a bad job, really. Quiet, boring, mostly. The kind of place where nothing ever happened, which was exactly what I needed at the time. I'd gone through a rough breakup and wanted something that didn't require me to think too much or interact with people. Midnight to 8 in the morning, 5 days a week. I'd sit in the little office near the entrance, watch the security monitors, do a couple of walking rounds, and that was it. The facility was huge, over 300 units spread across this flat, dusty lot. Chain link fences, bright sodium lights that made everything look yellow and sick. Most of the units were rented by people who had too much stuff and nowhere to put it. Old furniture, boxes of clothes, Christmas decorations, normal things. During the day, you'd see people coming and going, loading up trucks, arguing with each other about what to keep and what to throw away. But at night, it was dead. Just me and the hum of those lights. I'd been working there about 4 months when I started noticing Unit 237. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just a feeling. You know how sometimes you become aware of something without really thinking about it. Like when you realize you've been hearing a sound for a while but only just noticed it consciously. That's what it was like with 237. I'd walk past it during my rounds and feel, I don't know, something. A kind of weight in the air around it. The door was always closed, always locked, just like all the others. But I started paying attention to it. I checked the records one night out of curiosity. Unit 237 had been rented by someone named E. Feldman. No first name listed, just the initial. The rental agreement had been signed 11 years ago. 11 years, and according to the payment records, it was always paid on time, always in cash, delivered in person on the first of every month by someone who wasn't E. Feldman. The notes said it was usually a different person each time. No other details. I mentioned it to my boss, Gary, one morning when he came in to relieve me. He shrugged. Some people are weird about their stuff, he said. As long as they pay, we don't ask questions. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. A few nights later, I was doing my 2 a.m. round. I always took the same route, start at the south end, work my way north, loop back around. It was a clear night, cold, and my breath was fogging in the air. I had my flashlight even though the overhead lights were on. I liked having it. Made me feel like I was doing something. When I got to 237, I stopped. The lock was still there. The door was still closed. But there was a smell. Faint, but unmistakable. Something rotten, not like food waste or garbage. Deeper than that. Organic. I stood there for a minute, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It seemed to be coming from inside the unit. I knocked on the door. I don't know why. It was a stupid thing to do. But I did it. No response. Just the hum of the lights and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. I made a note to tell Gary about it in the morning, but when I got back to the office, I forgot. Or maybe I didn't forget. Maybe I just didn't want to deal with it. The smell got worse over the next week. I started holding my breath when I walked past 237. Other units nearby didn't have the smell, just that one. I thought about opening it, but I didn't have the authority. Only Gary and the owner had the master keys, and I wasn't about to call them in the middle of the night over a bad smell. Then, one night, the door was open. Not wide open, just a crack, maybe 6 inches, enough to see darkness inside. I stopped in the middle of the path and stared at it. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. It's just a storage unit, I told myself. Someone probably came by earlier and didn't close it all the way, but no one had come by. I would have seen them on the cameras. I walked up to the door slowly, flashlight in hand. The smell was stronger now, thick. It made my eyes water. I put my hand on the edge of the door and pulled it open a little more. The inside of the unit was dark. My flashlight beam cut through the blackness and landed on something in the back corner. At first, I thought it was a pile of clothes, but then I saw the shape, the way it was folded in on itself, the angle of the limbs. I stepped back. My hand was shaking. I pulled the door shut, locked it with my own padlock. I kept a few in the office for emergencies and walked back to the office without looking behind me. I called Gary. It was 3 in the morning. But I didn't care, he answered, on the 5th ring, groggy and annoyed. There's something in Unit 237, I said. I think it's a body. There was a long pause. Then he said, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't open it again. The police came. Gary came. The owner came. They opened the unit while I waited by the fence, watching. I saw them go inside with flashlights and come out a few minutes later, talking quietly to each other. One of the cops looked pale. They wouldn't tell me what they found. Gary told me to go home and take the next few days off. Paid, he said. They'd call me if they needed a statement. I never got a call. When I came back to work the following week, Unit 237 was empty, completely cleaned out. The smell was gone. The door was open, and I could see inside. Bare concrete walls, bare floor, nothing. It looked like it had never been used. I asked Gary what happened. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, Don't worry about it. I pressed him. He sighed. The owner wants to forget it. The police are handling it. You didn't see anything, okay? That's the story. You didn't see anything. But I did see something. I saw the shape in the corner. I saw the way it was folded. And I remember now something I didn't register at the time. Something I didn't let myself think about until much later. When I shined my flashlight into that unit just for a second before I pulled the door shut, I saw the face, or what was left of it, and it was looking at me, not dead, not exactly. The eyes were open, and they moved. I don't work there anymore. When I was 19, I spent a summer working at a summer camp in northern Maine. It was one of those old camps that had been around forever. Wooden cabins, a lake, hiking trails, the whole thing. I wasn't a counselor. I was part of the kitchen staff, which meant I worked weird hours and didn't interact with the kids much. Mostly I prepped food, cleaned dishes, and tried not to get in anyone's way. The camp had a strange reputation. Nothing concrete, just rumors. People said it used to be a quarantine site back in the early 1900s, during some outbreak, tuberculosis maybe, or something worse. There were old foundations scattered in the woods where buildings used to be, and sometimes the counselors would take the older kids on hikes to see them. I went once. It was creepy. The foundations were just stone rectangles covered in moss, with rusted metal hooks still embedded in the walls. I remember thinking, what were the hooks for? The camp had been renovated and reopened in the 50s, and since then it had been operating every summer without incident. At least, that's what they told us during orientation. There was one cabin that wasn't used anymore. Cabin 12. It sat at the far end of the camp, past the other cabins, almost hidden by trees. The door was padlocked, and the windows were boarded up. When I asked why, one of the senior counselors, a woman named Diane, said it was structurally unsafe. Foundation problems. They were planning to demolish it at the end of the summer. That made sense, but it didn't explain why kids weren't allowed to go near it. There was an unspoken rule. If you saw a camper heading toward cabin 12, you redirected them. No one made a big deal out of it. It was just something everyone knew. I didn't think much about it until the middle of July. One of the other kitchen staff, a guy named Aaron, asked me if I wanted to check out cabin 12 with him one night after our shift. It was late, maybe 11. The campers were in bed, and the counselors were doing their nightly rounds. Why? I asked. He grinned. Aren't you curious? I was. So I said yes. We took a flashlight and walked down the path toward cabin 12. The woods were loud with crickets and frogs, and the air smelled like pine and damp earth. When we got close, Aaron slowed down. You ever notice how quiet it is here? He said. He was right. The usual sounds of the forest, the crickets, the frogs, they stopped. Not gradually. All at once. Like something had flipped a switch. The cabin looked worse up close. The wood was rotting, and the roof sagged in the middle. The padlock on the door was rusty but intact. Aaron tried the door anyway, pulling on it. It didn't budge. Let's check the back, he said. We walked around to the rear of the cabin. There was a window there, partially boarded up, but one of the boards had come loose. Aaron shined the flashlight through the gap. Can you see anything? I asked. He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring. Aaron, he stepped back suddenly, almost stumbling. His face was pale. What? I said. What did you see? He shook his head. Nothing. Let's go. Come on, you saw something. I said, let's go. He walked away fast, back toward the main camp. I stood there for a moment, then stepped up to the window and looked inside. At first, I didn't see anything. Just darkness and the faint shapes of old furniture. A table, chairs, something that might have been a bed frame. Then my eyes adjusted. There was someone standing in the corner. I jerked back, my heart pounding. I looked again, forcing myself to stay calm. It wasn't a person. It was just a shadow, a trick of the light. But the longer I looked, the more it seemed like it was moving. Not walking, just shifting, breathing. I stepped away from the window and hurried back to the main camp. Aaron never talked about it. Whenever I tried to bring it up, he changed the subject. After a few days, I stopped asking. But I started noticing things. Cabin 12 wasn't as isolated as I thought. From the kitchen window, if you looked at the right angle through the trees, you could see part of it. And sometimes, late at night when I was closing up, I'd see a light inside. Not a bright light, just a flicker, like a candle. I told myself it was my imagination. Or maybe it was counselors sneaking out there to smoke or hook up. But I never saw anyone going in or out. One night, about a week before the end of the summer, I was walking back to my cabin after my shift when I saw one of the campers standing on the path near cabin 12. He was maybe 10 years old, wearing pajamas, just standing there in the dark. I walked up to him. "Hey, buddy, you okay? You shouldn't be out here." He didn't look at me. He was staring at cabin 12. "She told me to come," he said quietly. "Who told you?" "The girl in the window." My skin went cold. "There's no one in there. Come on, let's get you back to your cabin." I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "She's waiting for me," he said. "She said I'm late." "Listen to me," I said, crouching down to his level. "There's no one in that cabin. It's just an old building. Let's go back, okay?" He finally looked at me. His eyes were distant, unfocused. "Okay," he said. I walked him back to his cabin and told his counselor what happened. She thanked me and said she'd keep an eye on him. The next morning, I found out the kid had gone missing during the night. They searched the whole camp, the woods, the lake. Nothing. The police came, brought dogs, combed through everything. His parents arrived, frantic and devastated. I gave a statement about seeing him near cabin 12, and they searched that area thoroughly. They didn't find him. The camp shut down early that year. I left the day after the search was called off. I never went back. But sometimes, late at night, I think about what he said. She's waiting for me. And I wonder who she was, and if she's still waiting. My grandmother died when I was 12. I wasn't particularly close to her. She lived a few states away, and we only saw her on holidays. But her death affected my mom deeply. They'd had a complicated relationship, and I think my mom carried a lot of guilt about things left unsaid. After the funeral, my mom inherited a few boxes of my grandmother's belongings, photographs, letters, jewelry, that kind of thing. She kept most of it in the attic, saying she'd go through it someday when she felt ready. Years passed. I went to college, graduated, started my own life. My mom never went through those boxes. When I was 26, my mom got sick. It happened fast. A stroke that left her partially paralyzed and unable to speak clearly. I moved back home to help take care of her, and one of the first things I did was start organizing the house. It was cluttered with years of accumulated stuff, and I thought cleaning it up might make things easier for both of us. That's when I found the boxes in the attic. I asked my mom if I could go through them, and she nodded. I don't think she cared anymore. Most of it was what you'd expect. Old photographs of people I didn't recognize. Letters written in faded ink. A handful of cheap jewelry. But at the bottom of one box, I found something strange. It was a journal, small, leather-bound, with yellowed pages. The handwriting inside was cramped and difficult to read, but I could make out enough to understand it was my grandmother's. The entries were mostly mundane. Grocery lists, reminders, complaints about the weather. But as I flipped through, I started noticing something odd. Every few pages, there was an entry that didn't fit. They were written in a different tone, urgent, almost frantic, and they all said variations of the same thing. She's in the house. I saw her again today, in the hallway. She's getting closer. There were no other details, no explanation of who she was. I felt a chill as I read them. I flipped to the last entry in the journal, dated just a few days before my grandmother died. It said, "She's in the mirror now. I can't look anymore." I closed the journal and sat there for a while, trying to make sense of it. My grandmother had never shown any signs of mental illness, as far as I knew. But these entries were disturbing. I brought the journal downstairs and showed it to my mom. She looked at it for a long time, her face unreadable. Then she shook her head slowly and pushed it away. I didn't press her. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about the journal, about the entries. She's in the mirror now. I got up to get a glass of water and passed by the hallway mirror on the way to the kitchen. I stopped for just a second. I thought I saw something in the reflection. Not me, someone else, standing behind me. I spun around. There was no one there. I told myself it was my imagination, that I'd been thinking too much about the journal, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Over the next few days, I started noticing things, small things. Objects that weren't where I'd left them, doors that I'd closed, standing open. And the mirrors, I couldn't look at them without feeling like something was wrong. Like the reflection wasn't quite right. One night, I was helping my mom get ready for bed when she grabbed my arm suddenly. Her eyes were wide, and she was trying to say something. Her speech was so slurred I could barely understand, but I finally made it out. "Don't look." "Don't look at what?" I asked. She pointed at the mirror on her bedroom wall. I looked. I couldn't help it. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just my reflection and my mom's. But then I noticed something. In the reflection, there was a third person, standing in the doorway behind us. I turned around. The doorway was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was closer. I grabbed my mom and pulled her out of the room. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. I closed the door and locked it, even though I knew that wouldn't help. "What is that?" I said, more to myself than to her. My mom just shook her head. She looked terrified. I covered every mirror in the house that night. I used sheets, towels, anything I could find. I didn't care how crazy it seemed. I couldn't look at them anymore. The next morning, I called a priest. I'm not religious, but I didn't know what else to do. He came by that afternoon, a kind older man who listened patiently as I explained what had been happening. He didn't seem surprised. "Mirrors can be doorways," he said. "If something wants to come through, and if it has a strong enough connection to someone, it can." "A connection to who?" I asked. He looked at me sadly. "Usually someone who's afraid, someone who's been watching for a long time." He blessed the house. He said prayers in every room. When he left, he told me to keep the mirrors covered for at least a month, maybe longer. I did, but even now, years later, I don't keep mirrors in my house. I avoid them when I can, and when I can't, I try not to look too closely, because sometimes, just for a second, I still see her, standing just behind me, waiting. I used to live in an apartment building downtown, a converted warehouse with concrete floors and high ceilings. It was affordable, relatively quiet, and close to where I worked. I liked it. The building had maybe 30 units, and most of my neighbors kept to themselves, which suited me fine. I'd been living there for about 8 months when I started hearing the footsteps. They came from the apartment above mine, Unit 408. I was in 308. The footsteps were always at night, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning. They weren't loud, but they were consistent, pacing, back and forth. Sometimes they'd go on for hours. At first, I didn't think much of it. People have insomnia. People work weird hours. But after a few weeks, it started to bother me. Not because of the noise. I could sleep through worse. But because of the rhythm. It was too regular, too deliberate. Like someone was measuring the room, over and over, never stopping. I never saw anyone going into or out of Unit 408. I started paying attention, watching the stairs and the elevator when I came and went. but I never saw anyone. The door to 408 always looked the same, closed, no light coming from underneath, no sounds during the day. I asked the building manager about it. He was a middle-aged guy named Frank who spent most of his time in the basement office watching television. Unit 408, he said, frowning. That's been vacant for a couple months. Are you sure? I said. I hear someone walking around up there at night. He shook his head. Must be the pipes or something. Old. Building. Makes noises. But I knew the difference between pipes and footsteps. That night, I went upstairs and knocked on the door to 408. No answer. I tried the handle. Locked. I put my ear to the door and listened. Nothing. Just silence. I went back downstairs, and an hour later, the footsteps started again. I couldn't let it go. A few nights later, I went upstairs again, this time with my phone to record the sound. I stood outside 408 and held the phone up to the door. The footsteps were clear, steady. Pacing. I knocked. Hello? Is someone in there? The footsteps stopped. I waited. Nothing. Then, slowly, I heard something else. A dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. It moved from one side of the apartment to the other, slow and deliberate. I backed away from the door. The next day, I showed the recording to Frank. He listened, his expression unreadable. I'll check it out, he said. 2 days later, he told me he'd gone into the unit and found nothing. No signs of anyone being there. No furniture, no belongings, nothing. You probably heard something from another unit, he said. Sound travels weird in this building, but I knew what I heard, and it was directly above me. The footsteps continued. Every night, same time, same rhythm. I started sleeping with earplugs, but I could still hear them faintly, like a heartbeat in the walls. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I went upstairs and tried the door again. This time, it opened. I don't know if it was unlocked or if I just pushed harder, but it swung open slowly, revealing the dark interior. I stepped inside. The apartment was empty, completely bare. No furniture, no curtains, nothing, just concrete floors and bare walls. The streetlight outside cast faint shadows through the uncovered windows. I stood in the middle of the room and listened. Silence. I walked through the apartment, checking each room. The bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen, all empty. There was no one there. But when I came back to the main room, I noticed something. There were marks on the floor, faint but visible in the dim light. Scuff marks, like someone had been pacing back and forth in the same path, over and over, for a long time. I followed the path with my eyes. It went from one wall to the other, then back. A straight line, perfectly straight. I knelt down and touched one of the marks. It was worn into the concrete, like a groove. How long would it take to wear a mark into concrete? I stood up quickly and left the apartment, pulling the door shut behind me. The footsteps didn't stop. But now, when I heard them, I couldn't stop thinking about the marks on the floor, about how long someone would have to walk back and forth to wear down concrete, about what they were waiting for. I moved out a month later. I didn't give notice. I just packed my things and left. I never found out who was in Unit 408. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear footsteps above me, even though I live in a house now, on the ground floor. When I was 16, I got a job at a small-town library. It wasn't much, shelving books, helping people find things, checking items in and out. The librarian, Mrs. Coulter, was a stern woman in her 60s, who ran the place like it was a cathedral. Silence was enforced. Rules were strict, but I liked the quiet, and I liked being around books. The library was old, built sometime in the 1920s, and it still had that old library smell. Paper, dust, wood polish. It was a single large room with tall shelves and narrow aisles. There was a back room where we kept supplies and older books that didn't circulate much anymore. Mrs. Coulter told me I didn't need to worry about the back room. She took care of it herself. That should have been my first clue. I worked there for a few months without incident. It was a simple job, and I was good at it. But I started noticing something strange. Every now and then I'd be shelving books in one of the aisles, and I'd hear a sound from the back room. A soft thump, like something falling. Or a creak, like a floorboard shifting. I'd glance toward the back, but the door was always closed. One afternoon, when Mrs. Coulter had stepped out for lunch, I decided to check the back room. I told myself I was just being thorough, making sure everything was organized. But really, I was curious. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was smaller than I expected, lined with shelves full of old, dusty books. Most of them looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. There was a small desk in the corner with a stack of papers and a lamp. Everything was neat and orderly, just like the rest of the library. But there was something off about the room. The air felt heavier, colder, and the smell, it wasn't the usual library smell. It was something else, something stale and faintly sweet, like old flowers. I walked over to the desk and looked at the papers. They were checkout cards, the old-fashioned kind that libraries used to use before computers. Each card had a list of names and dates, showing who had checked out a particular book and when. I picked up one of the cards and read the title, The King in Yellow. The last person to check it out was someone named L. Marsh. The date was April 14th, 1987. I frowned. That was almost 40 years ago. Why was the card still here? I flipped through the other cards. All of them were old, dated from the 70s and 80s, and all of them had the same thing in common. None of the books had ever been returned. I felt a strange unease settle over me. I put the cards down and turned to leave. But as I did, I noticed something. There was another door at the back of the room. I hadn't seen it when I first came in because it was partially hidden by a shelf. It was narrow, almost like a closet door, and it was slightly ajar. I walked over and pushed it open. There was a staircase leading down. I stared at it for a long moment. I hadn't known there was a basement. Mrs. Coulter had never mentioned it. I should have left. I should have closed the door and gone back to work. But I didn't. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight, then started down the stairs. The staircase was steep and narrow, and the air grew colder as I descended. The walls were bare stone, damp to the touch. At the bottom there was a small room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with a low ceiling. The floor was dirt, and in the center of the room there was a pile of books. They were stacked haphazardly, dozens of them, maybe more. I walked closer and shined my light on them. They were old, the covers faded and warped from moisture. I picked one up and opened it. The pages were covered in writing, not printed text. Handwriting. Dense, cramped, almost illegible. I flipped through the book, but every page was the same. Just line after line of handwriting, with no clear beginning or end. I picked up another book. Same thing. And another. All of them were filled with handwriting. I felt my chest tighten. I dropped the book I was holding and stepped back. That's when I noticed the corner of the room. There was something there, half hidden in the shadows. I shined my light on it. It was a chair, and sitting in the chair was a person. I froze. The person didn't move. They were slumped forward, their head down, their hands resting on their lap. They were wearing old, tattered clothes, and their skin was pale and waxy. I took a step back, my heart pounding. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. Then the person's head lifted, slowly. Their face was wrong. The features were blurred, indistinct, like someone had smudged a photograph. But the eyes were clear, and they were looking at me. I ran. I don't remember going up the stairs or through the back room or out into the main library. I just remember bursting through the front door and into the sunlight, gasping for air. Mrs. Coulter found me sitting on the steps outside, shaking. She asked what happened, and I tried to tell her, but the words didn't come out right. She told me to go home. She said I looked pale, that I probably needed rest. I never went back. A few weeks later, I heard that Mrs. Coulter had retired. The library closed down not long after that. Budget cuts, they said. But sometimes I wonder what happened to the books in that basement, and the person in the chair. And I wonder if they're still there, waiting, writing. I used to work the night shift at a 24-hour drugstore on the edge of town. It wasn't a bad job, really. Quiet, mostly. The kind of place where you'd get a handful of customers between midnight and 6 insomniacs picking up prescriptions, truck drivers grabbing energy drinks, the occasional teenager buying condoms and trying way too hard to act casual about it. The store had this layout where the pharmacy was at the very back, and to get there you had to walk down this long main aisle that cut straight through the middle of everything. Fluorescent lights overhead, yellowed with age. They hummed. You know that sound. It gets into your head after a while, becomes part of the silence rather than breaking it. I'd been working there about 4 months when I started noticing the man in aisle 7. Aisle 7 was health and beauty, shampoos, conditioner, bar soap, lotion, stuff like that. And I started noticing him because he was there every single night I worked. Not always at the same time, but always at some point during my shift. I'd glance up from my register or from stocking shelves, and I'd see him standing in aisle 7. He never bought anything. At first, I thought maybe he was one of those people who just liked to browse, killing time, maybe homeless, and just enjoying the warmth and the lights. I didn't mind. We didn't have a policy against people lingering as long as they weren't causing trouble. And he wasn't. He'd just stand there, facing the shelves, sometimes picking up a bottle of shampoo, reading the label, putting it back. Slow, methodical. He was older, maybe in his 60s. Always wore the same tan jacket, too heavy for the season. Thinning hair combed to the side, glasses. He looked like someone's grandfather. Harmless. But after a couple of weeks, it started to feel strange, because he really was there every night. I worked 4 nights a week, and without fail, at some point, there he'd be. Aisle 7, same spot, usually, just standing. I mentioned it to my coworker, Dennis, this college kid who worked the shift before mine and overlapped with me for an hour. He shrugged it off. Said he'd seen the guy too, but didn't think much of it. Probably just lonely, Dennis said. Old people get like that. Maybe that was it. Maybe he just needed to be around people, even if he wasn't interacting. I tried to believe that. Then one night, around 2:30 in the morning, I was stocking vitamins in aisle 6, right next to aisle 7. The store was empty except for me and him. I could hear him over there, the faint shuffle of his shoes on the linoleum. I wasn't paying much attention, just going through the motions, unloading boxes, putting bottles on shelves. And then I heard him say my name. Not loud, just barely audible, but clear. Jonathan. I froze. I hadn't been wearing a name tag that night. I'd forgotten it at home. And I'd never spoken to this man, never introduced myself. I was sure of it. I stood up slowly and looked around the end cap into aisle 7. He was standing there, same as always, facing the shelves. His back to me, he didn't turn around. I waited. My heart was doing something strange in my chest, this slow, hard thud that made my throat feel tight. "Excuse me," I finally said. He didn't respond, didn't move. I walked around the corner into aisle 7. There were only a few feet between us now. I could see the back of his head, the bald spot at his crown, the frayed collar of his jacket. "Did you say something?" I asked. Nothing. I stepped a little closer, close enough that I could smell him, this stale, papery smell, like old books left in a damp basement. "Sir." And then, without turning, he spoke again. Same quiet, almost gentle tone. "You should check the back door." My stomach dropped. The back door was the employee entrance, the one that led to the storage room and the loading dock. It was at the far end of the store, past the pharmacy, down a dim hallway that no customers were ever supposed to go down. It was always locked. I'd checked it myself at the start of my shift, same as I did every night. "What?" I said, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. He still didn't turn, just stood there, facing the bottles of dandruff shampoo. "You should check the back door," he repeated, same inflection, like he was reading from a script. I backed away. I don't know why I didn't ask him how he knew my name, or why he was telling me this. I just backed away, turned, and walked quickly toward the back of the store. The hallway was darker than usual. One of the overhead bulbs had gone out. I could see the back door at the end, the green exit sign above it, glowing faintly. It looked closed. I approached slowly. My hand was shaking when I reached for the handle. It was unlocked. Not just unlocked. It was open. Just barely, maybe an inch. Enough that the seal had been broken and the night air was leaking in, cold and damp. I shoved it shut and locked it, tested the handle twice. My hands felt numb. I turned and walked back down the hallway, back into the store. My mind was racing. I was sure I'd locked that door. I was sure. When I reached the front, I looked toward aisle 7. He was gone. I checked the whole store. Every aisle, the bathrooms, the pharmacy area. Nothing. No one. I checked the security footage the next morning before I left. I watched myself stocking shelves in aisle 6. I watched the man standing in aisle 7. I watched myself walk toward the back hallway. And then, on the footage, while I was out of frame, I watched the man turn around for the first time. He looked directly at the camera, right into it. His face was neutral, no expression at all. And then he walked toward the front of the store, past the registers, and out the front door. Calm, slow, but here's the thing. I never heard the door chime. The front door had a sensor. Every time it opened, a chime sounded. Loud. You couldn't miss it. On the footage, he walked right through that door. Silence. I asked my manager if anyone else had mentioned the man. She said no. Said she'd never seen anyone matching that description. I showed her the footage. She watched it, frowned, and then said, "That's weird. The timestamp's wrong." I looked. She was right. The footage I was watching, the part where the man turned and walked out, was time-stamped from 3 years earlier. 3 years before I'd even started working there. I quit 2 weeks later. I couldn't do it anymore. Not the night shift, not that store. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed and the house is quiet, I think about what he said. You should check the back door. And I wonder if he was warning me about something that was trying to get in. Or if he was telling me that something already had. When I was 12, my family moved into a house on the outskirts of a small town in Pennsylvania. It was an old house, built in the early 1900s, but it had been renovated enough that it didn't feel too creaky or outdated. Hardwood floors, big windows, a basement that had been converted into a den, with a TV and a couch. My parents loved it. I had the bedroom on the second floor, at the end of the hallway. It was a decent size, with a closet and a window that looked out over the backyard. The first few nights, I didn't sleep well. You know how it is when you move somewhere new. Every sound is unfamiliar. The way the floors settle, the way the wind hits the windows. Your brain hasn't learned what's normal yet, so everything feels a little off. But after a week or so, I adjusted, started sleeping fine. Except for the nights I'd hear the knocking. It wasn't loud, that's the thing. If it had been loud, I would have woken my parents up right away. But it was soft. 3 knocks. Always 3. Slow and evenly spaced. Like someone knocking politely on a door, not wanting to disturb anyone too much. It seemed to be coming from inside the wall. The first time I heard it, I thought maybe it was the pipes. Old houses do that, right? But it didn't sound like pipes. It sounded exactly like knuckles on wood. It happened maybe once or twice a week. Always at night. Always after I'd gone to bed. I'd be lying there in the dark, and I'd hear it. 3 knocks, and then nothing. I told my mom about it. She said it was probably just the house settling, or maybe a tree branch hitting the side of the house on windy nights. I wanted to believe that, but I knew what I was hearing. It wasn't a branch. It wasn't pipes. It was knocking, and it was always in the same spot. The wall opposite my bed, right next to the closet. After a few months, I started knocking back. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I just wanted to see if anything would happen. Or maybe I wanted to prove to myself that it wasn't real, that I was imagining the whole thing. So one night, after I heard the 3 knocks, I got out of bed, walked over to the wall, and knocked 3 times in the same spot. I waited. Nothing. I went back to bed, feeling stupid. But the next night, it happened again. 3 knocks. And this time, I didn't wait. I got up immediately and knocked back. 3 times. And then I heard it. 3 knocks. Right away, in the exact same spot. My blood went cold. I backed away from the wall and got into bed, pulling the blankets up to my chin. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, staring at the wall, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't, but it did the next night, and the night after that. It became a pattern. I'd hear 3 knocks. I'd knock back, and then I'd hear 3 more. I didn't tell my parents. I don't know why. I think part of me was afraid they wouldn't believe me, and another part of me was afraid they would. This went on for weeks, and then, one night, the knocking changed. It was faster, more insistent. Not 3 slow knocks anymore. It was more like a rapid tapping, like someone was excited or impatient. I didn't knock back that night. I just lay there, frozen, listening. And then I heard something else. A voice. It was muffled, like it was coming from far away, but I could make out the words, "Let me out." I didn't move, didn't breathe. Let me out. It was a child's voice, a little girl, I think. It sounded desperate. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I just lay there, eyes wide, staring at the wall. The knocking stopped. The voice stopped. The room was silent again. The next morning, I told my dad. He didn't dismiss me, which I appreciated. He said he'd take a look at the wall, see if there was anything weird going on. That weekend, he cut a hole in the wall, just a small one, right where the knocking always seemed to come from. He said he wanted to check if there was any kind of hollow space, maybe where animals could be getting in. When he pulled back the drywall, we both saw it. There was a space behind the wall, not big, maybe a foot wide. Just an awkward gap left over from the way the house had been built or renovated. And inside the space, tucked into the corner, was a small, old doll. It was porcelain, or maybe ceramic, the kind with the painted face and the frilly dress. One of its eyes was cracked. Its hair was matted and dirty. My dad pulled it out, frowning. "How the hell did that get in there?" he muttered. I didn't answer. I was staring at the doll, at its face, at the way its one good eye seemed to be looking right at me. My dad tossed it in the trash, patched up the wall, said it must have been left there by a previous owner's kid, maybe got stuck somehow when they were renovating. I wanted to believe him. But that night, I heard the knocking again. 3 slow knocks. I didn't knock back. And then, after a long silence, I heard the voice again. Clearer this time. "Why did you let them take me?" I moved out of that room the next day. Started sleeping on the couch in the den. My parents thought I was being ridiculous, but they didn't push it. We moved out of that house 2 years later. I never told anyone about the voice, not until now. But sometimes, late at night, I still wonder if that doll really was just left there by accident, or if something else put it there, and if whatever was knocking on the other side of that wall is still looking for it. I used to go hiking a lot. Not anything extreme, just day hikes, local trails, the kind of thing you can do in a few hours and be back home by dinner. There was this one trail I loved, about 30 minutes from where I lived. It wasn't very popular, which I liked. Most weekends you'd have the whole place to yourself. The trail looped through a section of dense forest, mostly pine and oak, and then opened up to this ridge where you could see for miles. It was beautiful up there. Quiet, peaceful. I went up there one Saturday in late October. The weather was perfect, cool, crisp, the leaves just starting to turn. I parked at the trailhead around noon. There was one other car in the lot, which wasn't unusual. I figured I'd probably pass someone on the trail at some point. The hike up was uneventful. I had my headphones in, listening to a podcast, just enjoying the movement and the fresh air. It took about an hour to reach the ridge. When I got there, I sat down on one of the flat rocks and had some water. Took a few pictures. That's when I saw her. She was standing maybe 50 feet away, closer to the edge of the ridge, looking out over the valley. She had her back to me, long dark hair, jeans, a red jacket. I didn't think much of it, just another hiker. I finished my water, stood up, and started heading back down the trail. About halfway down, I saw her again. She was ahead of me on the trail, walking in the same direction I was. Same red jacket, same dark hair. I was a little surprised. I hadn't seen her pass me, and I didn't think I'd been sitting on the ridge that long. But I figured maybe I'd zoned out, or she'd taken a shortcut. I'm a pretty fast walker, and I was slowly catching up to her. I thought about calling out, just to let her know I was behind her, but I didn't want to startle her, so I just kept walking, figuring I'd pass her eventually. But here's the thing. No matter how fast I walked, I didn't get any closer. She was always the same distance ahead of me, maybe 30, 40 feet. I could see her clearly, the way her hair moved when she walked, the swing of her arms. But the gap between us never closed. I started walking faster, not running, but definitely faster than I'd normally go on a downhill trail. She stayed the same distance ahead. I slowed down, thinking maybe I was just misjudging the distance, that my eyes were playing tricks on me. She slowed down too. My heart started beating a little faster. This felt wrong. I stopped walking entirely and just stood there, watching her. She stopped too. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. She didn't move. And then, slowly, she turned around. I don't know what I expected to see. Maybe I thought she'd look annoyed or confused, wondering why I was following her. But when she turned, I couldn't see her face. I don't mean it was too far away or shadowed. I mean there was nothing there, just a blur, like when you're trying to remember someone's face from a dream, and your brain can't quite fill in the details. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, still nothing. Just that strange, unformed blur where her face should have been. She stood there for a moment, facing me, and then she turned back around and kept walking. I didn't follow her. I stayed where I was, frozen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. After a few seconds, she disappeared around a bend in the trail. I waited a full minute before I started moving again. I walked slowly, carefully, every nerve in my body screaming at me to turn around and go back the other way. But the trail only went one direction, down, back to the parking lot. When I reached the bend where she'd disappeared, I stopped and looked ahead. The trail was empty. I kept walking, faster now. I just wanted to get back to my car. When I finally reached the parking lot, I saw that the other car was gone. Mine was the only one there. I sat in my car for a long time before I started the engine. I kept looking at the trailhead, half expecting to see her walk out of the trees. She never did. I looked up the trail online when I got home. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe some story about a woman who'd gone missing there, or a legend, something that would explain what I'd seen. I didn't find anything like that. But I did find something. There was a forum post from a few years earlier, written by someone who'd hiked the same trail. They described seeing a woman in a red jacket walking ahead of them. They said they tried to catch up to her, but couldn't. And when she turned around, they couldn't see her face. There were a few replies to the post. Most people said it was probably just a trick of the light, or that the person had been dehydrated or tired. But one reply stood out. It just said, "Don't follow her all the way down." I haven't been back to that trail since, and I don't think I ever will. I lived alone for the first time when I was 24. It was a small apartment, a studio on the 3rd floor of an old building downtown. The rent was cheap, which should have been my first clue that something was off, but I was young and broke, and just happy to have my own place. The apartment was fine, a little cramped, a little drafty, but it had everything I needed. One room that served as bedroom, living room, and kitchen all at once, and a tiny bathroom with a shower that only ever got lukewarm. I moved in during the summer. Everything was great at first. I loved the independence, loved being able to come and go as I pleased, loved falling asleep and waking up in my own space. But after a few weeks, I started noticing something strange. Every morning when I woke up, things in the apartment were slightly different. Not in any big, obvious way. Just small things. A chair pushed out from the table when I was sure I'd pushed it in the night before. A cup in the sink that I didn't remember using. The bathroom door open when I knew I'd closed it. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful. I'd get home from work tired, zone out, not pay attention to what I was doing. It made sense. But then, it started happening more often, and the changes became harder to explain away. One morning I woke up and found a book on the floor in the middle of the room. It was a book I owned, one I kept on the shelf by the window, but I hadn't touched it in weeks. And it wasn't just on the floor. It was open, faced down, like someone had been reading it, and set it down. Another morning, I found the front door unlocked. That one scared me. I was always careful about locking the door. I'd check it twice before going to bed. But when I woke up and went to leave for work, the deadbolt was turned, the door slightly ajar. I started wondering if someone had a key. The landlord, maybe, or a previous tenant. I thought about getting the locks changed, but I didn't have the money for it, and I wasn't sure how to bring it up without sounding paranoid. So I started testing myself. Before I went to bed, I'd take a picture of the apartment, just a quick shot on my phone, showing the table, the chair, the door, whatever. And then in the morning, I'd compare. The first few nights, nothing. Everything looked the same, but on the fourth night, I saw it. In the picture I'd taken before bed, the chair was pushed in. In the morning, it was pulled out, just a little, maybe 6 inches. I stared at the photos for a long time. There was no mistaking it. Something had moved that chair while I was asleep. I started taking more pictures, different angles, the bathroom door, the kitchen counter, the window blinds. And every morning something was different. Not always the same thing. One morning, the bathroom door was open. Another morning, one of the blinds was pulled up higher than the others. Another morning, there was a cup in the sink. I wasn't imagining it. I thought about setting up a camera, but I didn't have one, and I couldn't afford to buy one. So I tried staying awake. I made coffee, kept the lights on, sat on my bed with my back against the wall, and waited. I made it until about 3 in the morning before I started nodding off. I tried to fight it, but I couldn't. My eyes kept closing. And then I heard it, the sound of the chair scraping against the floor. I snapped awake, my heart hammering. The apartment was dark. I'd turned off the lights at some point without realizing it. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and shined it around the room. Everything looked normal. The chair was in the same place it had been. Nothing was out of place, but I knew what I'd heard. I got up, walked over to the chair and looked at it, checked the floor around it for marks. Nothing. I went back to bed. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There were faint scratches on the floor near the chair, thin, parallel lines, like something had been dragged. I bent down and looked closer. The scratches weren't random. They formed a pattern, a slow arc, like the chair had been moved in a very deliberate, very careful way, over and over again. I started spending less time in the apartment. I'd come home late, go to bed, and leave early. I didn't want to be there anymore. The place didn't feel like mine. One night, I came home around midnight. I was exhausted. I didn't even bother turning on the lights. I just kicked off my shoes, collapsed onto the bed, and closed my eyes. And then I felt it. The bed shifted, like someone had sat down on the edge of it. I opened my eyes. The room was dark, but I could see the outline of everything. The table, the chair, the door. No one was there. But the bed had shifted. I felt it. The mattress dipped slightly, right near my feet. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then I felt it again. A little closer this time, like someone was crawling up the bed toward me. I bolted upright, scrambling back against the wall, my hand fumbling for my phone. I turned on the flashlight. The bed was empty. I moved out the next week, broke my lease, didn't care about the penalty. I never told the landlord why. I didn't know how to explain it. But before I left, I did some research on the building. I found an old newspaper article from 15 years earlier. A woman had died in my apartment. They found her in bed. The article said it looked like she'd died in her sleep, but there were signs that she'd tried to get up, tried to reach the door, but she couldn't. No one knew why. When I was in college, I had this friend named Matt. We met freshman year and ended up being roommates sophomore year. He was a good guy, quiet, kind of introverted, but funny once you got to know him. We got along well. During the spring semester of that year, Matt started acting strange. It was subtle at first. He'd space out during conversations, like his mind was somewhere else. He'd forget things he'd told me the day before. He started sleeping a lot. Like, a lot. I'd come back from class, and he'd be in bed. I'd wake up in the morning, and he'd still be in bed. I asked him if he was okay. He said he was just tired, stressed about classes. I believed him. College does that to people. But then it got worse. He started talking in his sleep. I'm not talking about random mumbling. I mean full sentences, conversations almost, like he was talking to someone. The first time I heard it, I thought maybe he was on the phone. But when I looked over at his bed, his phone was on the nightstand. He was asleep. His eyes were closed, and he was talking. I couldn't make out most of what he was saying. It was too quiet. But I heard enough to know he was responding to something, like someone was asking him questions, and he was answering. It freaked me out, but I didn't say anything. I figured he'd be embarrassed if I brought it up. But it kept happening, every night. And it got louder. One night, I woke up to the sound of him laughing. It was the middle of the night. The room was dark, and Matt was laughing. Not a normal laugh. It was too loud, too sharp. It didn't sound like him. I sat up and looked over at his bed. He was sitting up too. His eyes were open. "Matt?" I said. He didn't respond. He just kept laughing. And then he stopped, abruptly, like someone had flipped a switch. He turned his head and looked at me. I couldn't see his face clearly in the dark, but I could see his eyes. They caught the faint light from the window. They looked wrong, too wide, too focused. "Matt, are you okay?" I asked. He didn't say anything. He just stared at me, and then he lay back down and went still. The next morning, I asked him about it. He said he didn't remember. Didn't remember laughing. Didn't remember sitting up. He said he'd been having weird dreams lately, but that was it. I wanted to believe him, but a few nights later, it happened again. I woke up to the sound of him talking. This time, I could hear what he was saying. "I don't want to," he said. His voice was strained, like he was scared. There was a pause. "I don't want to," he said again, louder. Another pause, and then he screamed. I shot out of bed and turned on the light. Matt was sitting up, his hands over his face, breathing hard. Matt, what the hell, man? He looked at me. His face was pale. His eyes were red, like he'd been crying. It won't stop, he said. What won't stop? The dream. I keep having the same dream. He wouldn't tell me what the dream was about. He said he couldn't. Said he didn't know how to explain it. But he said it felt real. More real than anything else. After that, he started staying up at night. He'd sit at his desk with the light on, drinking coffee, trying not to fall asleep. He said he didn't want to have the dream again. But eventually, he couldn't fight it anymore. He'd pass out in his chair or on the floor, and the talking would start again. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep either. I was scared of what I'd wake up to. One night I woke up, and Matt wasn't in his bed. I sat up and looked around. The room was empty. The door was open. I got up and looked out into the hallway. It was dark. The dorm was silent. I found him at the end of the hall, standing in front of the window. His back was to me. He was just standing there, perfectly still. Matt, I called out. He didn't move. I walked closer, slowly. Matt, what are you doing? He turned around. His eyes were open, but he wasn't awake. I could tell. He had that same blank, distant look. And then he said, very calmly, "They want me to jump." My blood went ice cold. "Who?" I asked. "Who wants you to jump?" He didn't answer. He just turned back to the window. I grabbed his arm and pulled him away. He didn't resist. I walked him back to our room and sat him down on his bed. He blinked a few times, like he was waking up. "What happened?" he asked. "You were sleepwalking," I said. "You were at the window." He looked at me, confused, and then his face went pale. "I remember," he said quietly. "I remember the dream." He told me that in the dream he was in our dorm room. But it wasn't quite right. Everything was slightly off. The walls were the wrong color. The furniture was in different places. And there were people in the room with him. He couldn't see their faces. They were just shapes, shadows. And they kept telling him to do things, small things at first. Move the chair, open the door, turn off the light. But then they started asking for more. They wanted him to leave the room, to walk down the hall, to open the window, to jump. He said he kept telling them no, but they wouldn't stop. They just kept asking, over and over. And every time he fell asleep, he was back in that room with them. I told him he needed to see someone, a doctor, a therapist, someone. He said he would, but he didn't. A week later, I came back to the room after class and found it empty. Matt was gone. His stuff was still there, but he wasn't. I called him. No answer. I checked with our friends. No one had seen him. I reported it to the RA. They called campus security. They found him 3 hours later. He was on the roof of the building. He was standing at the edge, looking down. They talked him down. Got him to a hospital. I visited him a few days later. He was in the psychiatric wing. He looked tired, hollowed out. I asked him what happened. He said he didn't remember going to the roof. He said he fell asleep in the library, and when he woke up, he was standing on the roof. He said the people in the dream had finally convinced him. He's okay now. He took a medical leave from school, got help, got on medication. He's doing better. But he told me something before I left that day. He said that sometimes, late at night, when he's lying in bed, he can still hear them, whispering, asking him to come back. There's this thing I do sometimes when I can't sleep. I scroll through my phone, look at old photos, read old messages, just sort of drifting through my own history, not really thinking about it. A few months ago, I was doing that, and I came across a photo I didn't remember taking. It was a picture of me. I was sitting on a bench in a park I didn't recognize. I was smiling, looking off to the side, like someone had just said something funny. But I didn't remember that moment. Didn't remember being in that park. Didn't remember anyone taking that photo. I checked the date. It was from 2 years earlier. I stared at the photo for a long time, trying to jog my memory, but nothing came. It was like looking at a picture of a stranger who just happened to have my face. I scrolled through more photos, looking for others from around that same time, hoping it would help me remember. And I found more, lots more. Photos of me in places I didn't recognize, doing things I didn't remember, smiling at people I didn't know. There were dozens of them, all from that same year. I felt sick. I called my mom, asked her if she remembered anything strange happening that year, if I'd been acting weird, or if I'd gone on any trips I might have forgotten about. She said no, said I'd been normal, said I'd visited her for Thanksgiving and Christmas, same as always. I hung up and went through my messages, my emails, my social media, looking for any clue. Nothing. It was like an entire part of my life had happened, been documented, and then erased from my memory. I thought about going to a doctor, thought maybe I had some kind of neurological issue, memory loss, early onset dementia, something. But I didn't, because a part of me didn't want to know. A part of me was afraid that if I started digging, I'd find something worse than just forgotten memories. I still don't know who took those photos. I still don't know where I was, and I don't know what I was doing. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that version of me, the one in the photos, the one who was smiling, and I wonder if they remember me. I need to tell someone about the apartment I lived in 3 years ago. I haven't spoken about it much, not in detail, because every time I tried, people would look at me like I was exaggerating or making it into something it wasn't. But I'm not. I've gone over it so many times in my head that I know exactly what happened, and I know exactly how it felt. I moved into the place in late October. It was a small one-bedroom in an older building, nothing fancy, but the rent was good, and it was close to my work. The landlord was this older man, maybe mid-60s, who didn't say much during the showing. He walked me through the rooms with his hands in his pockets, nodding when I asked questions, but not really offering anything extra. The apartment had been empty for a while, he said. The previous tenant had left suddenly. I didn't think much of it. People leave places all the time. The first 2 weeks were normal. I unpacked, arranged furniture, got used to the sounds of the building. It was quiet, which I liked. The neighbors kept to themselves. I'd hear footsteps, sometimes in the unit above me, the occasional door closing, but nothing disruptive. I worked long hours back then, so I was mostly just sleeping there anyway. It started small. I'd come home and find the bathroom door open when I was sure I'd closed it. Not wide open, just ajar, like someone had nudged it. I figured it was the way the door sat on its hinges. Maybe the floor was uneven. I tested it a few times, closed it firmly, and it would stay shut. But then a day or two later, it would be open again. Then it was the kitchen. I'd leave a glass on the counter before bed, and in the morning it would be in the sink. Not broken, not moved far, just relocated. I started questioning myself. Maybe I'd put it in the sink and didn't remember. I was tired a lot. My memory could have been playing tricks on me. But then I started noticing the smell. It wasn't constant. It would come and go, always in the evening, usually around 8 or 9 o'clock. A faint, stale smell, like old clothes that had been left in a closet too long. It seemed to come from the bedroom, but I could never pinpoint it. I checked the vents, thinking maybe something had died in the walls. I cleaned everything, washed the curtains, scrubbed the floors. The smell would disappear for a few days, and then come back. One night, I woke up around 2 in the morning. I'm not sure why. There was no sound, no disturbance. I just opened my eyes. The room was dark, except for the streetlight glow coming through the blinds, casting these soft, slanted lines across the wall. I lay there for a moment, trying to figure out what had woken me, and then I realized the bedroom door was open. I always closed it before bed. Always. I'm weird about that. I like the feeling of a closed space when I sleep, like I'm sealed in. But the door was open about a foot, and the hallway beyond it was completely black. I stared at it for a long time, my heart starting to thud in my chest. I listened. The apartment was silent. I thought about getting up to close it, but something stopped me. I don't know what. A feeling. The sense that if I got out of bed and walked toward that door, something would be standing on the other side of it. I didn't move. I stayed in bed, watching that gap of darkness, until I eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I checked the door. It closed fine. The latch worked. There was no draft, no reason it should have opened on its own. I started keeping my phone next to me at night, just in case. I'm not sure what I thought I'd do with it, but it made me feel better. A few nights later, I woke up again. Same time, around 2. The door was open again, wider this time, and now I could hear something. It was faint, a soft sound, rhythmic. At first I thought it was someone breathing, but it wasn't quite that. It was more like fabric moving, like someone shifting their weight from foot to foot, their clothes rustling. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I just listened, my eyes locked on that open door. The sound continued for maybe a minute, and then it stopped. Silence again. I waited, my whole body tense, but nothing else happened. In the morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. I was stressed, not sleeping well. My mind was filling in gaps that weren't there. I thought about asking the landlord if anyone else had complained about weird sounds, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. I didn't want to be the tenant who couldn't handle living alone, but it kept happening. Every few nights, I'd wake up and the door would be open. Sometimes I'd hear that rustling sound. Once, I thought I heard a footstep in the hallway, a single soft thud on the carpet. I turned on the light and got up to check. Nothing. The apartment was empty. The front door was locked, windows closed. I was alone. I started sleeping with the bedroom door locked. I bought one of those cheap sliding locks and installed it myself. It made me feel safer, like I'd created a barrier between me and whatever was happening out there. The first night I used it, I slept better than I had in weeks. But the next morning, when I woke up, the lock was undone. The door was open. I stared at it, my stomach sinking. I had locked it. I knew I had. I'd checked it twice before getting into bed. But the little metal latch was sitting loose in its bracket, and the door was open about 2 feet. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't rationalize it. I thought about cameras, setting up some kind of recording to see what was happening, but part of me didn't want to know. Part of me was terrified that I'd see something I couldn't unsee. I stopped sleeping well. I'd lie awake, staring at the door, waiting for it to open. Some nights it did, some nights it didn't. The pattern was random, which somehow made it worse. If it had happened every night, I could have prepared for it, expected it, but the unpredictability kept me on edge. One night, I woke up, and the door wasn't just open. Someone was standing in the hallway. I didn't see them clearly. It was dark, and they were just beyond the reach of the street light. A shape, a silhouette, taller than me, I think. They weren't moving. They were just standing there, facing the bed, facing me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I felt like my entire body had locked up. I wanted to scream, to reach for my phone, to do anything, but I was frozen. We stayed like that for what felt like forever. Me in bed, them in the hallway, watching. And then they stepped back, one step, slow and deliberate, and they were gone, swallowed by the darkness. I don't know how long I waited before I moved. Eventually, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it toward the hallway. Empty. I got up, my legs shaking, and checked the entire apartment. The front door was locked. The windows were closed. I was alone. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, waiting for morning. The next day, I called the landlord. I didn't tell him everything. I just said I felt uncomfortable, that I'd been hearing strange sounds, and I wanted to know more about the previous tenant. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "They didn't tell me much, just that they needed to leave." I pressed him. "Did they say why?" Another pause. "They said they didn't feel safe." I moved out 2 weeks later. Broke the lease, paid the penalty, didn't care. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't spend another night in that apartment, waiting for that door to open, waiting for that shape to come back. I never found out what it was. I don't know if it was something wrong with the building, some trick of the layout that made me see and hear things that weren't there, or if it was something else, something that lived in that space, that had been there long before me. I still think about it sometimes, about that figure in the hallway, the way it just stood there, watching, and I wonder if it's still there, standing in the dark, waiting for the next person to move in. When I was 16, I worked at a small grocery store in my town. It wasn't a chain, just a family-owned place that had been there forever. The kind of store where everyone knew each other, where you'd run into your neighbors and chat while waiting in line. I liked it. It felt safe. I worked mostly evening shifts, stocking shelves and running the register when it got busy. The store closed at 9, and my job was to help clean up and lock the doors before heading home. There were usually 2 or 3 of us closing, so I was never alone, except on Thursdays. For some reason, Thursdays were dead. Hardly anyone came in after 7, so the manager would send the other employees home early and leave me to close by myself. I didn't mind. I'd put on music, sweep the aisles, count the register. It was peaceful. There was one customer who came in every Thursday, like clockwork, always around 8:30, right before we closed. He was an older man, maybe in his 50s, average height, thinning hair. He never bought much, a few items, usually the same things. Bread, milk, a newspaper. He'd walk slowly through the aisles, taking his time, and then check out without saying much. Just a nod, a quiet thanks, and he'd leave. I started recognizing him after a few weeks. He had this routine, this specific way of moving through the store. He'd always start in the back, near the dairy section, and work his way forward. He'd pause sometimes, like he was reading labels, but I never saw him pick up anything he didn't end up buying. One Thursday, he came in a little earlier than usual, around 8. I was restocking a shelf near the front when I heard the door chime. I glanced up and saw him walk in. He didn't look at me, just headed straight to the back like always. I went back to what I was doing, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way he'd walked past me without acknowledging me, or maybe it was just the quiet of the store. It felt heavier that night, like the air was pressing down. I finished stocking and went to the register to start counting the drawer. I could hear him moving around in the back, his footsteps echoing on the tile floor. He was taking longer than usual. I kept glancing at the clock, watching the minutes tick by. 8:15, 8:20, 8:30. At 8:40, he finally came to the register. Same items as always. Bread, milk, newspaper. I rang him up, told him the total, and he handed me a 20. I gave him his change, bagged his items, and he took them without a word. But he didn't leave. He just stood there, holding the bag, looking at me. I waited for him to say something, to move, but he didn't. He just stared. His expression was blank, not angry or threatening, just empty, like he was looking through me instead of at me. "Is there something else you need?" I asked. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet store. He didn't respond. He just kept staring. I felt a prickle of unease run down my spine. I forced a smile, trying to break the tension. "We're closing soon, so..." He blinked, slowly, and then turned and walked toward the door. The chime rang as he left, and I watched through the window as he got into his car and drove away. I locked the door behind him, my hands shaking a little. I told myself it was nothing. He was just weird. People are weird sometimes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been wrong about that interaction. The way he'd looked at me. The way he'd just stood there. The next Thursday he came in again. Same time, same routine. But this time, when he got to the register, he didn't just stare. He spoke. "Do you work here every Thursday?" His voice was quiet, flat. It didn't sound like a normal question. It sounded like he already knew the answer. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Pretty much." He nodded, slowly. "You're always here alone." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I felt my stomach drop. "Sometimes," I said. "Not always." He didn't say anything else. He paid, took his bag, and left. I called my manager that night. After I locked up, I told him I didn't feel comfortable closing alone anymore, that one of the customers had been acting strange. He sighed, said he'd see what he could do. But Thursdays were slow and he couldn't justify having extra staff. I thought about quitting, but I needed the job, and I told myself I was overreacting. The guy was creepy, sure, but he hadn't actually done anything. He hadn't threatened me. He hadn't touched me. He'd just asked a question. The next Thursday, he didn't come in. I was relieved, but also on edge, wondering if he'd show up at the last minute. 9 o'clock came and went. I locked the doors, cleaned up, and went home. But the Thursday after that, he was back. He came in at 8:30, bought his usual items, and when he got to the register, he leaned in a little closer than before. "I know where you live," he said. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. "What?" He didn't repeat himself. He just smiled, a thin, slight smile, and walked out. I didn't finish closing. I grabbed my things, left the lights on, and ran to my car. I locked the doors and sat there, shaking, trying to figure out what to do. I didn't know if he was serious. I didn't know if he'd followed me home before, if he'd been watching me. I didn't know anything. I called the police when I got home. I told them what he'd said, described him, gave them the dates he'd come in. They said they'd send someone by the store to check it out, but there wasn't much they could do unless he actually did something. They told me to be careful, to let them know if he came back. He didn't. I never saw him again, but I quit the job 2 weeks later. I couldn't go back there. Every time I thought about that store, about standing behind that register alone, I felt sick. I kept imagining him coming back, imagining him waiting outside in the parking lot, imagining him knowing things about me that he shouldn't know. I don't know who he was. I don't know if he really knew where I lived, or if he was just trying to scare me, but it worked. Even now, years later, I think about him sometimes, about the way he looked at me, the way he said those words, so calm and certain, and I wonder if he's doing it to someone else now, standing in some other store, watching some other person, saying things that make their skin crawl. I hope not, but I don't know. My best friend in college was a girl named Sarah. We met during freshman orientation and became inseparable almost immediately. We had the same sense of humor, the same taste in music, the same cynical outlook on most things. We spent nearly every day together for 4 years. Study sessions, late-night drives, weekends at each other's family homes. She was the kind of friend you think you'll have forever. During our senior year, Sarah started seeing a guy named Matt. He was fine, nice enough, kind of quiet, studying engineering. I didn't have strong feelings about him one way or the other. He made Sarah happy, and that was what mattered. But over the course of a few months, I started seeing less of her. She'd cancel plans, say she was busy with Matt. I figured it was just the honeymoon phase, that eventually things would balance out, but they didn't. She became distant. When we did hang out, she seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. I asked her about it once. We were sitting in her dorm room, and I said, "Are you okay? You seem different." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, just tired." I didn't push it. I thought maybe she was stressed about graduation, about figuring out what came next. We all were. Then one night she called me at 2 a.m. I was asleep, and the sound of my phone ringing jolted me awake. I answered groggy and heard her voice on the other end. "Can you come get me?" She sounded strange. Not scared exactly, but off, flat. "Where are you?" I asked, sitting up. "I'm at Matt's apartment. Can you just come?" I got dressed and drove over. It was a 20-minute drive, and the whole way I kept trying to call her back, but she didn't answer. When I got there, she was sitting on the curb outside the building, her arms wrapped around her knees. I pulled up, and she got in without saying anything. "What happened?" I asked. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said. "I just needed to leave." "Did you guys fight?" She didn't answer. She just stared out the window. I drove her back to campus, and when we got to her dorm, she thanked me and went inside. I sat in my car for a while, trying to figure out what had just happened. The next day, I texted her to see if she was okay. She said she was fine, that she just needed some space. She didn't explain further, and I didn't press. A few days later, I ran into Matt on campus. He looked rough, tired, like he hadn't been sleeping. I almost didn't say anything, but then he stopped and looked at me. "Is Sarah okay?" he asked. "I think so," I said. "Why?" He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. She's been acting weird. I don't know. She says things that don't make sense. Like what? Like, he trailed off, like he wasn't sure he should say it. She keeps talking about someone being in my apartment, but there's no one there. It's just me. I felt a chill run through me. What do you mean? She'll stop in the middle of a conversation and say, "Who's that?" And I'll ask who she's talking about, and she'll point to the corner or the hallway, and there's nothing there. At first, I thought she was messing with me, but she's serious. She really sees something. I didn't know what to say. I told him I'd check in with her, and we left it at that. That night, I went to Sarah's dorm. She let me in, and we sat on her bed. I asked her about what Matt had said, about her seeing someone in his apartment. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I don't know how to explain it." "Try," I said. She looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw something raw in her expression. Fear, maybe, or confusion. "There's a woman," she said. "I see her when I'm at his place. She's always standing in the corner or in the hallway, just watching. She doesn't move. She doesn't say anything. But she's there." "A woman?" I said. "Who?" "I don't know. I've never seen her face clearly. It's always dark where she's standing, or she's turned away. But I know she's there. I can feel her. Sarah, that doesn't make sense." "I know," she said. Her voice was small. "I know it doesn't, but I'm not making it up. I see her." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to help, but I didn't understand what was happening. I suggested she talk to someone, maybe a counselor, but she shook her head. "I'm not crazy," she said. "I didn't say you were, but I think she heard it anyway." Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Sarah stopped going to Matt's apartment altogether. She broke up with him, said she couldn't handle it anymore. I tried to be there for her, but she kept pulling away. She stopped going to class. She stopped answering my calls. One night, I went to her dorm and knocked on the door. No answer. I tried the handle, and it was unlocked. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark. Sarah was sitting on the floor, her back against the bed, staring at the corner of the room. "Sarah," I said. She didn't respond. She just kept staring. I followed her gaze, looking at the corner. There was nothing there, just the wall, the shadows. "Sarah, what's going on?" "She's here," Sarah said quietly. I felt my blood run cold. "Who's here?" "The woman." Her voice was barely a whisper. She followed me. I turned on the light. The room was empty, just me and Sarah. "There's no one here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's in the corner," Sarah said. She still hadn't looked at me. "She's always in the corner." I didn't know what to do. I sat down next to her, and we stayed like that for a while, in silence. Eventually, I convinced her to see a doctor. She was diagnosed with something, I don't remember exactly what, some kind of psychotic episode brought on by stress. They put her on medication, and slowly, over the course of a few months, she got better. She started going to class again. She started calling me back, but she never talked about the woman again, and I never asked. We graduated, went our separate ways. We still talk sometimes, but it's not the same. There's a distance now, something unspoken between us. I think about that night in her dorm room a lot. The way she stared at that corner, the certainty in her voice, when she said the woman was there. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if she really was. I used to go hiking by myself a lot. There was a trail near where I grew up, nothing too intense, just a few miles through the woods that looped back to the parking lot. I'd go there to clear my head, to get away from people for a while. It was quiet, peaceful. I almost never saw anyone else out there. One afternoon in late summer, I decided to do the trail. It was a weekday, mid-afternoon, so I figured I'd have the place to myself. I parked my car, laced up my boots, and started walking. The first half of the hike was normal. The sun was filtering through the trees. Birds were singing. Everything felt calm. I was about halfway through when I saw someone else on the trail. It was a man, maybe in his 30s, walking toward me. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, his hands in his pockets. He didn't have a backpack or water bottle or any of the usual hiking gear. He looked like he'd just wandered out there. As we got closer, he smiled and nodded. "Nice day," he said. "Yeah," I said, nodding back. I kept walking, but after I passed him, I got this weird feeling. I couldn't explain it. Something about the way he'd looked at me, or the fact that he didn't have any gear. It felt off. I glanced back over my shoulder. He was still walking, heading in the direction I'd come from. I told myself I was being paranoid and kept going. But a few minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped and turned around. The man was there, maybe 20 feet back, walking in my direction now. He saw me looking and stopped too. "Did you forget something?" I called out, trying to sound casual. He didn't answer. He just stood there, watching me. My heart started to pound. I turned and kept walking, faster this time. I didn't look back, but I could hear his footsteps again, matching my pace. I started to jog. The footsteps behind me sped up too. I broke into a run. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like forever. My lungs were burning, my legs aching, but I didn't stop. I didn't hear the footsteps anymore, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get back to my car. When I finally reached the parking lot, I was gasping for air. I fumbled with my keys, got in the car, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I looked around the parking lot. There was no one there, no sign of the man. I sat there for a long time, trying to catch my breath, trying to calm down. Part of me wondered if I'd overreacted. Maybe he'd just been walking the same direction. Maybe I'd imagined the footsteps speeding up. But I didn't go back to that trail. Not for a long time. A few months later, I was reading the local news online, and I saw a story about a woman who'd gone missing. She'd been hiking on a trail in the area, the same trail I used to go to. They found her car in the parking lot, but she never came back. They never found her. I don't know if it's connected. I don't know if the man I saw was the same person, or if it was just a coincidence. But I think about it sometimes, about how I ran and how I made it back to my car. And I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't. My grandmother died when I was 12. I wasn't particularly close to her. She lived a few hours away, and we only saw her a few times a year. But after she passed, my mom inherited some of her things, including an old wooden jewelry box. The box was small, ornately carved, with a little brass latch. My mom didn't want it, said it was too old-fashioned, so she gave it to me. I thought it was pretty, so I kept it on my dresser. Inside were a few pieces of costume jewelry, nothing valuable, just old brooches and earrings that my grandmother must have worn decades ago. I didn't touch them much. I'd open the box occasionally, look at the contents, and close it again. But a few weeks after I got the box, I started having strange dreams. They were always the same. I'd be in a house I didn't recognize, walking through dark hallways. The walls were covered in old floral wallpaper, peeling in places. I could hear someone humming, a woman's voice, soft and distant. I'd follow the sound, walking from room to room, but I never found the source. The humming would get louder, closer, but I'd always wake up before I saw who it was. At first, I didn't connect the dreams to the jewelry box. I figured it was just my mind processing the loss of my grandmother, even though I hadn't been that affected by her death. But the dreams kept happening night after night, and they started to feel less like dreams and more like memories. One night, I woke up in the middle of the dream. I was standing in one of the hallways, and the humming had stopped. I turned around, and there was a door behind me that hadn't been there before. It was slightly open, and I could see light coming from inside. I walked toward it, my heart pounding, and pushed the door open. Inside was a bedroom. There was a woman sitting at a vanity, her back to me. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress, her hair pinned up. She was looking into the mirror, but I couldn't see her reflection. She stopped moving and tilted her head slightly, like she'd heard me. I woke up. I was drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I looked around my room, trying to orient myself. Everything was normal. My dresser, my bookshelf, my window, and the jewelry box sitting on my dresser, closed, except the latch was undone. I stared at it, my stomach sinking. I knew I'd closed it the last time I'd looked inside. I always closed it, but the latch was hanging loose, and the lid was slightly open. I got out of bed and walked over to the dresser. I reached out and opened the box fully. Inside, everything looked the same. The brooches, the earrings, all in their places. But there was something new. A small, folded piece of paper tucked under one of the brooches. I picked it up, my hands shaking, and unfolded it. It was old, yellowed, the edges torn. There was writing on it, in faded blue ink. It said, "She's still here." I dropped the paper. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know who had written it, or when, or why it was in the box. But I knew I didn't want it in my room anymore. I grabbed the box, took it downstairs, and put it in the basement. I told my mom I didn't want it, that it creeped me out. She didn't ask why. The dreams stopped after that. I never went back to that house in my sleep, never heard the humming again. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that woman at the vanity, the way she tilted her head, like she knew I was there. And I wonder if she's still looking for me. There's one more thing I need to tell you, and then I'll let you go. A few years ago, I was staying at a hotel for work. It was a small place, nothing fancy, in a town I'd never been to before. I checked in late, around 10 at night, and the guy at the front desk barely looked at me as he handed me the key. Room 214. I took the elevator up, found the room, and let myself in. It was a standard hotel room. A bed, a desk, a TV, a bathroom. Everything was clean, generic. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the edge of the bed. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint, but distinct. Something chemical like cleaning products. But underneath it was something else. Something stale and sour. I checked the bathroom, thinking maybe the toilet or the shower was the source, but it seemed fine. I opened the window to air the room out and tried to ignore it. I was exhausted, so I got ready for bed and turned off the lights. I lay there in the dark, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, trying to fall asleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't the smell or the room or anything I could put my finger on. It was just a feeling, a sense that I wasn't alone. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I was in a hotel. There were other people in the building. The walls were thin. I was probably just hearing sounds from the neighboring rooms. But then I heard something that made me freeze. A voice, quiet, muffled, coming from somewhere in the room. I sat up, my heart pounding, and turned on the light. The room was empty. The door was locked. The window closed. I checked the bathroom again. Nothing. I turned off the light and lay back down, telling myself I'd imagined it. But I heard it again. A voice whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but it was there, faint, insistent. I turned on the light again and sat there wide awake, staring at the walls. I didn't hear the voice again, but I didn't sleep either. I stayed up the rest of the night, waiting for morning. When I checked out the next day, I asked the guy at the front desk if anyone had complained about room 214. He looked at me funny and said no. I didn't push it. But later, out of curiosity, I looked up the hotel online. I found a forum where people left reviews, and I scrolled through, looking for anything about room 214. I found one review. It was short. Don't stay in room 214. You won't sleep. That was it. No explanation. No details. I never went back to that hotel. I was 11 when I started noticing the man in the blue jacket. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. I'd see him standing near the fence by the park where I played after school. He was always alone, always wearing the same faded blue windbreaker, even when it was hot outside. I remember thinking it was strange that he never seemed to do anything. He didn't read. He didn't talk on a phone. He just stood there, facing the playground, hands in his pockets. My mom worked late most nights, so I stayed with my neighbor, Mrs. Albrecht, until around 7. She was kind but distracted, always on the phone or watching her soap operas, so I had a lot of freedom. I'd ride my bike around the block, play in the park, just kill time until my mom picked me up. The first time I really noticed him was on a Thursday. I was on the swings, and I looked up and saw him standing by the chain-link fence, maybe 30 feet away. He wasn't looking directly at me, but I could feel his attention. You know that feeling, right? When someone's watching you, but pretending they're not. I got off the swing and went to the slide instead, on the other side of the playground. When I glanced back, he'd moved. Not a lot. Just enough to have a better angle on where I was now. I didn't tell anyone. I don't know why. I think part of me thought I was being paranoid. Adults were always telling me not to talk to strangers, and maybe I thought seeing a stranger was the same as being in danger, and I didn't want to seem like a baby. But he kept showing up. Every day after school, he was there. Sometimes by the fence. Sometimes sitting on the bench near the water fountain. Once, I saw him standing under the big oak tree at the edge of the park, half hidden in shadow. I started testing him. I'd leave the park early and walk a different route back to Mrs. Albrecht's house. I'd look over my shoulder, and sometimes, not every time, but sometimes, I'd see the blue jacket a block behind me. I told myself it was a coincidence. The neighborhood wasn't that big. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he just liked walking. But then I saw him on Saturday. My mom took me to the grocery store that weekend, and while she was picking out vegetables, I wandered over to the cereal aisle. And there he was, standing at the end of the aisle, pretending to look at something on the shelf, but his eyes flicked to me the moment I turned the corner. My stomach dropped. I walked quickly back to my mom and stayed close to her the rest of the trip. I didn't say anything. I don't know why. I think I was afraid she'd tell me I was imagining it, and then I'd feel stupid, or worse, she'd believe me, and then it would become real in a way I wasn't ready for. The next week, he wasn't at the park. I felt relief at first, but it was mixed with something else, a kind of unease, like when you lose sight of a wasp in your room. It's not gone. You just don't know where it is anymore. On Wednesday, Mrs. Albrecht asked me to take the trash out to the curb. It was just starting to get dark, that deep blue twilight where the streetlights haven't quite taken over yet. I dragged the bin down the driveway, and when I turned to go back inside, I saw him. He was across the street, standing next to a parked car, just standing there, looking at me. I froze. He didn't move, didn't smile, didn't wave. He just looked at me with this expression I couldn't read. Not angry, not friendly, just waiting. I ran inside and locked the door behind me. Mrs. Albrecht asked me what was wrong, and I told her I thought I saw a coyote. She believed me. We'd had coyotes in the neighborhood before. That night, my mom picked me up late, around 8. I looked out the window the whole drive home, scanning the sidewalks, the parked cars, the spaces between houses. I didn't see him. But when we pulled into our driveway and I got out of the car, I saw something that made my skin go cold. There was a blue windbreaker draped over our mailbox. It was neatly folded, almost like someone had left it there on purpose, like a gift. My mom didn't notice it until I pointed it out. She frowned and picked it up, turning it over in her hands. "Someone must have dropped this," she said. "I'll take it to the Goodwill." I wanted to tell her. I wanted to say, "No, don't touch it. That's his. He left it here. He knows where we live." But the words wouldn't come. I felt like if I said it out loud, something worse would happen. She took the jacket inside, and I followed her, looking back over my shoulder at the street. I didn't see him that night, or the next day, or the day after that. In fact, I never saw him again. But here's the thing that still bothers me, even now, more than 20 years later. About a month after the jacket appeared, my mom was going through some old boxes in the garage. She found a photo album from when I was a baby, and she called me over to look at it with her. We were flipping through pictures. Me in a high chair, me at the park, me on Halloween. And then she stopped on one photo. It was taken at a birthday party. I was maybe 2 years old, sitting on the grass with a bunch of other kids. And in the background, standing near the fence, there was a man in a blue jacket. My mom didn't notice him. She was pointing at me in the photo, laughing at how chubby I was. But I saw him. He was blurry, out of focus, but it was him. Same jacket, same posture, same hands in his pockets. I never told her. I still don't know what he wanted. I don't know if he was watching me my whole childhood, or if it was just those few weeks, or if I'd just never noticed him before. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if he's still out there, if he ever stopped. And I wonder if he left that jacket as a message, or as a promise. When I was 23, I moved into a studio apartment on the 4th floor of an old building downtown. It was cheap, which should have been my first clue, but I was broke and desperate. The place was small but fine. One room, a tiny kitchenette, a bathroom with a narrow shower. The windows faced an alley, so it was always dim inside, even during the day. The landlord was an older man named Gene. He didn't say much when he showed me the place, just handed me the keys and told me rent was due on the 1st. No exceptions. I moved in on a Saturday. It didn't take long. I didn't have much furniture. A futon, a folding table, a couple of lamps. I spent the first night sitting on the floor eating takeout, and feeling like I'd finally done something right. My own place. No roommates. No rules. It was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. I didn't notice it at first, but after a few days, I realized I never heard my neighbors. No footsteps above me. No muffled conversations through the walls. No TV sounds. No music. Nothing. I figured maybe the building was just well insulated, or maybe people kept to themselves. But then I started noticing other things. The air in the apartment always smelled faintly like cigarettes, even though I didn't smoke, and the windows were always open. I'd come home from work and feel like someone had been there. Nothing was missing. Nothing was moved. It was just a feeling, like the space had been disturbed. I tried to ignore it. Then, about 2 weeks in, I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard something. A voice. It was faint, like it was coming from far away, but I could hear it clearly enough to know it was a woman. She was talking, not yelling, just talking. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was strange. Flat, like she was reading something out loud. I sat up and listened. It stopped. I waited for a few minutes, then lay back down. The moment my head hit the pillow, it started again. I got up and walked around the apartment, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It wasn't the walls. It wasn't the hallway. It was almost like it was coming from inside the room, but that didn't make sense. I checked my phone. No notifications. No apps running. Nothing. The voice continued for maybe 10 more minutes, then stopped abruptly. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I asked Gene about it. He was in the lobby fixing a broken mailbox. I told him I'd heard a woman's voice in the middle of the night and asked if the walls were thin. He didn't look at me. "Don't worry about it," he said. But I don't worry about it. He said it in a way that made it clear the conversation was over. I went back upstairs feeling uneasy. That night, I heard it again. Same time, around 3 a.m., same voice, same flat, emotionless tone. I tried to record it on my phone, but when I played it back, there was nothing, just silence. I started dreading going to sleep. The voice came every night for a week, always at 3 a.m., always lasting 10 to 15 minutes. I tried earplugs, white noise, sleeping with headphones in. Nothing helped. I could still hear it, like it was inside my head. I started feeling exhausted. I'd drag myself to work, barely functional, and come home to that oppressive silence, knowing what was waiting for me in a few hours. One night, I decided I wasn't going to just lie there and take it. When the voice started, I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and went into the hallway. The building was dark. The overhead lights were out, and the emergency exit signs cast everything in a dim red glow. I walked slowly down the hall, stopping at each door, pressing my ear against it, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. Nothing. Every apartment was silent. I went down to the 3rd floor, then the 2nd, then the 1st. Nothing. By the time I got back to my apartment, the voice had stopped. I stood in my doorway, breathing hard, and that's when I noticed something. My door had been open the whole time. I always locked it. Always. But when I'd left to search the building, I hadn't taken my keys. I'd just walked out, and the door had been open. I stepped inside and locked it behind me, my hands shaking. The next morning, I went down to the lobby and asked Gene, who lived in the apartment below me. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "No one?" "What do you mean, no one?" "It's empty. Has been for a while." "What about above me?" "Empty. Next to me?" He didn't answer. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Gene, how many people live in this building?" He stared at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes. Not hostility, not indifference, pity. "Just you," he said. "I moved out 3 days later. I didn't give notice. I didn't ask for my deposit back. I just packed my stuff and left." I never found out what the voice was. I never found out why the building was empty, or why Gene rented me that apartment, or what he thought was going to happen. But I'll tell you what still bothers me. A few months later, I was walking downtown and passed by the building. I glanced up at the 4th floor, at the window that used to be mine. The light was on, and there was someone standing in the window, looking down at me. I didn't stop walking. I didn't look back. My dad died when I was 16. Heart attack. It was sudden. He was fine one day, gone the next. We were close, so it hit me hard. For months, I felt like I was walking around in a fog, just going through the motions. About a year after he died, I started getting phone calls. They always came late at night, usually between midnight and 2 in the morning. My phone would ring. I'd pick it up, and there'd be silence on the other end. Not dead air. I could hear something. Breathing, maybe. Or static. It was hard to tell. The first few times I'd say hello and wait. Nothing. After a while, I just started hanging up. But they kept coming. Every few nights, sometimes multiple times a night, I thought it was a prank, a wrong number, a robocaller with a glitch. I blocked the number, but then the calls came from a different number. I blocked that one, and they came from another. Eventually, I just stopped answering. But then, one night, I got a voicemail. I almost deleted it without listening, but something made me check. The message was just breathing. Slow, steady breathing. And then, right before it cut off, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. A voice. Faint, distorted, but unmistakable. It said my name, not my full name. The nickname my dad used to call me. No one else called me that. Just him. I listened to the voicemail 3 times, my hands shaking, trying to convince myself I'd heard it wrong. But I hadn't. I told my mom about it the next morning. She got upset and said it was someone from school messing with me, that kids were cruel, that I should just change my number. So I did. The calls stopped for about 2 weeks. Then they started again. Same thing. Late at night, silence, heavy breathing, and every few calls, a voicemail with that same voice saying my name. I stopped sleeping. I'd lie in bed, staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring. When it did, I'd feel this awful mix of dread and something else. Something I didn't want to admit. Hope. Because as much as it scared me, part of me wondered if it really was him. If somehow, in some way I didn't understand, my dad was trying to reach me. I know how that sounds. But grief makes you think crazy things. One night I decided I was going to answer. I was going to stay on the line no matter what and try to figure out who or what was calling me. The phone rang at 1:47 a.m. I picked up. Silence. Then the breathing. I didn't say anything. I just listened. The breathing continued for maybe 30 seconds. Then I heard something else. A sound in the background, faint but distinct. It was a TV, and I recognized what was playing. It was an old Western my dad used to watch. I'd seen it 100 times growing up. I knew the dialogue, the music, the sound effects. My heart was pounding. "Dad," I whispered. The breathing stopped For a long moment, there was nothing. Then the call ended. I sat there in the dark, staring at my phone, my mind racing. The next day, I went into the garage and started going through my dad's things. My mom hadn't touched them. She couldn't. Everything was exactly how he'd left it. I found his old cell phone in a drawer. It was dead, obviously. I plugged it in and waited for it to charge. When it finally turned on, I went through his call log. Nothing unusual. Just calls to my mom, me, a few co-workers. Then I checked his voicemails. There was one saved message from me. I didn't remember leaving it. I played it. It was my voice, younger maybe from a year before he died. I was calling to tell him I'd be late getting home from school. Nothing important, just a routine message. But here's what made my skin crawl. At the end of the message, right before I hung up, there was a sound in the background, a TV playing the same Western. I dropped the phone. I don't know what it means. I don't know if it was a coincidence, or a glitch, or something I just didn't remember. But the calls stopped after that. I never heard from the number again, and I never told my mom what I found. I used to work as a night janitor at a medical office building. It wasn't a hospital, just a 5-story building with doctor's offices, a couple of dental clinics, some admin offices. The job was easy. I'd come in at 10 p.m., clean the floors, empty the trash, and leave by 6 a.m. I almost never saw anyone. The building was old, built sometime in the 70s, and it had that weird institutional smell. Disinfectant, old carpet, stale air. Most of the offices were dark after hours, but a few people worked late, so I'd see lights on here and there. There was one office on the 3rd floor that always bothered me. It was at the end of a long hallway, past the elevators, in a corner that didn't get much foot traffic. The door was unmarked. No name, no number. Just a blank white door with a small frosted glass window. The light was always on, every single night, no matter what time I passed by. The light was on. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured someone just forgot to turn it off, or maybe it was on a timer. But then I started noticing other things. The door was always closed, but I could hear sounds coming from inside. Not loud sounds, just faint noises. Papers rustling, a chair creaking, footsteps. I assumed someone was working late. But one night, I needed to empty a trash bin that was right outside that door, and as I bent down to pick it up, the sounds stopped completely, like whoever was inside had heard me and gone still. I stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing. I knocked. No answer. I tried the handle. Locked. I went back to work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me through that frosted glass window. A few nights later, I asked my supervisor about the office. He looked confused. Which one? 3rd floor, end of the hall. Unmarked door. He frowned. That's not an office. That's a storage room. Are you sure? I hear people in there all the time. There's no one in there. It's just old supplies. We're supposed to clean it out, but no one's gotten around to it. He gave me a key and told me I could check it out if I wanted. That night, I stood outside the door, holding the key, listening. I heard the sounds again. Footsteps, a drawer opening and closing. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room was empty. No furniture, no supplies. Just an empty room with a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. And the light was off. I stood there, staring, trying to make sense of it. The light had been on from the hallway. I'd seen it through the frosted glass. But inside, the bulb was off. I stepped into the room, and the door swung shut behind me. I spun around and tried the handle. Locked. I don't know how. I'd just unlocked it. But now it was locked from the inside. I banged on the door, yelling for someone to let me out. No one came. I pulled out my phone to call my supervisor, but I didn't have a signal. I was stuck. I sat down on the floor and tried to calm down. I told myself someone would find me eventually. The morning shift would come in. They'd hear me. It would be fine. But as I sat there in the dark, I started to feel like I wasn't alone. There was no sound, no movement, but I could feel it. A presence. Someone standing in the corner, just out of sight, watching me. I turned on my phone's flashlight and swept it around the room. Nothing. But the feeling didn't go away. I sat there for hours, my back against the door, too scared to move. At some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, it was morning, and someone was unlocking the door from the outside. It was my supervisor. He looked annoyed. "What the hell are you doing in here?" I tried to explain, but he just shook his head. "The door wasn't locked," he said. "It doesn't even have a lock." I looked at the handle. He was right. No lock, just a simple lever handle. I could have left at any time. But I swear, I tried. I swear the door was locked. I quit 2 days later. I don't know what that room was, or why it felt the way it did, or why I heard those sounds, but I know I wasn't imagining it, and I know I was right to leave. When I was 8, my family went on a road trip through the Southwest. My parents wanted to see the national parks, Zion, Bryce Canyon, the Grand Canyon. We drove for hours through empty desert, stopping at gas stations and tiny motels along the way. On the third day, we were driving through a particularly desolate stretch of highway in Utah. There was nothing around, just flat, red earth and distant mesas. We hadn't seen another car in over an hour. My dad needed to stop for gas, so when we saw a small station up ahead, he pulled in. It was old, really old. The kind of place that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 50s. Faded paint, rusted pumps, a single-story building with a screen door hanging crooked on its hinges. There was one other car there, a beat-up sedan parked near the side of the building. My dad got out to pump the gas, and my mom went inside to use the restroom and buy some snacks. I stayed in the car with my little brother. I was looking out the window, bored, when I noticed something. The other car's engine was running. I could see the exhaust coming out of the tailpipe, and I could hear the faint rumble of the motor, but no one was inside. I watched it for a while, waiting for someone to come back, but no one did. After a few minutes, I got curious and told my brother I was going to look around. He didn't care. He was playing his Game Boy. I got out of the car and walked over to the sedan. The driver's side window was rolled down, and I peeked inside. The interior was clean, too clean, like it had just been detailed. There was nothing personal, no trash, no bags, no air freshener hanging from the mirror. Just empty seats and that low, steady hum of the engine. The keys were in the ignition. I looked toward the gas station building, expecting to see someone coming out, but the door stayed closed. I walked around to the back of the car and looked at the license plate. It was blank. Not missing, not covered, just blank. A white plate with no numbers, no letters, no state name. I felt a prickle of unease. I walked back toward our car, and that's when I saw the man. He was standing in the shadow of the building, just to the left of the door. I hadn't noticed him before, but now I couldn't look away. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His face was hard to see. The shadow covered most of it, but I could feel him looking at me. I stopped walking. He didn't move. We stood there, maybe 20 feet apart, just staring at each other. Then my mom came out of the building, holding a bag of chips and a couple of sodas. She didn't see the man. She walked right past him, and he didn't react, didn't turn his head, didn't acknowledge her at all. "Come on, sweetie," she called to me. "Let's go." I looked back at the man one more time, and I swear I saw him smile. Not a friendly smile. I got in the car, and we drove away. I didn't say anything to my parents. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't know how to explain what I'd seen, or maybe because I was afraid they'd tell me I was being silly. But I kept thinking about it. The running car, the blank license plate, the man in the shadow. A few hours later, we stopped at a visitor center, and while my parents were looking at maps, I went over to a payphone. I don't know what made me do it, but I called 911. When the operator answered, I told her about the gas station. I described where it was, what I'd seen, the car with no license plate. She asked me if I was in danger, and I said no. She asked me if I'd seen anyone hurt, and I said no. Then she told me there was no gas station on that stretch of highway. I insisted there was. I told her we'd just been there, that my dad had gotten gas, that my mom had gone inside. She put me on hold. When she came back, her voice was different. Careful. She said there used to be a gas station there, but it had been closed for over 15 years. I hung up. I didn't tell my parents, but that night, lying in a motel bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. If the station was closed, where did my dad get gas? If the building was abandoned, where did my mom go? And who was the man in the shadow? I never got answers. But sometimes, when I'm driving through the middle of nowhere, and I see an old, forgotten place on the side of the road, I think about that day, and I wonder if we ever really left. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, the kind of place where you didn't lock your doors and kids could stay out until the streetlights came on. It was safe, boring, even. There was a woman who lived at the end of my street, named Mrs. Crenshaw. She was old, maybe in her 70s, and she lived alone in a small white house with a chain-link fence around the yard. She kept to herself, didn't talk to the neighbors much, but she wasn't unfriendly. She'd wave if you walked by. Sometimes she'd sit on her porch in the evenings, knitting or reading. I didn't think much about her until one summer, when I was 12, I'd started a dog walking business, just a way to make a little extra money. Most of the clients were neighbors, people I knew. One day, Mrs. Crenshaw stopped me while I was walking a golden retriever named Bailey. "Do you walk cats?" she asked. I laughed, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't smiling. "I'm serious," she said. "I have a cat, and I think she'd like to go outside more, but I can't manage it myself. I'd pay you." It seemed weird, but I said sure. She offered me $20 a week, which was more than I was making with the dogs, so I agreed. She told me to come by the next day after school. When I showed up, she was waiting on the porch. She handed me a harness and leash and told me the cat's name was Marlowe. "She's shy," Mrs. Crenshaw said, "so be gentle, and whatever you do, don't let her off the leash." I went inside to get the cat. The house was dim and cluttered, filled with old furniture and stacks of newspapers. It smelled like dust and something else, something sweet and stale, like old flowers. Marlowe was sitting on the back of the couch, a sleek black cat with yellow eyes. She didn't resist when I put the harness on her, and she walked calmly beside me as I led her outside. We walked around the block, and she seemed to enjoy it. She'd stop every now and then to sniff something or watch a bird, but she didn't pull or try to run. It was easy money. I walked Marlowe 3 times a week for the rest of the summer, Mrs. Gossip. Crenshaw would always be on the porch when I arrived and when I came back. She'd thank me, pay me, and that was it. She never invited me in again, and I never asked. But near the end of August, something happened. I was walking Marlowe past the park when she suddenly stopped. Her ears flattened, and her whole body went rigid. I looked around, trying to see what had spooked her, but there was nothing. Just a couple of kids on the swings, a mum pushing a stroller. Marlowe started pulling on the leash, hard, trying to go back toward Mrs. Crenshaw's house. I'd never seen her act like that. I tried to calm her down, but she was frantic, yowling and clawing at the ground. Then I heard it, a voice coming from somewhere behind me. It was faint, but I could just make out the words. "Bring her here." I turned around. There was a man standing at the edge of the park, near the trees. He was too far away for me to see his face clearly, but I could tell he was looking at me. Or at the cat. "Bring her here," he said again, louder this time. Marlowe was trying to pull free, her claws scraping against the pavement. I didn't know what to do. Every instinct told me to run, so I did. I picked up the cat and sprinted back to Mrs. Crenshaw's house. When I got there, she was standing in the doorway, her face pale. "Did someone follow you?" she asked. "There was a man," I said, breathless. "He told me to bring her to him." Her expression darkened. She took Marlowe from me and went inside without another word. The next day I went back to see if she still wanted me to walk the cat. The house was empty. Not just empty, cleared out. The furniture, the newspapers, everything was gone. The windows were bare, and the yard looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I asked my mom what happened to Mrs. Crenshaw, and she looked at me like I was crazy. "Who?" "Mrs. Crenshaw, the old woman at the end of the street." "Honey, no one's lived in that house for years," I insisted. I told her about the cat, the walks, the $20 a week. She took me down to the house and showed me. The door was locked. The windows were dusty. There was mail piled up on the porch, addressed to someone I didn't recognize, dated from over a decade ago. I stood there, staring, trying to make sense of it. My mom asked if I was feeling okay. I told her I was fine, but I wasn't. I still don't know what I was walking that summer, and I don't know who the man in the park was or what he wanted. But I think about it sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd listened to him, if I'd brought her to him. I'm glad I didn't. It's late now. You're still here, still listening. Maybe you're almost asleep. Maybe you're wide awake. I want you to think about something before you go. We spend so much of our lives trying to explain the things that frighten us. We tell ourselves stories to make sense of the senseless. We say it was a dream, a coincidence, a trick of the light. But sometimes there's no explanation. Sometimes things just are. And the worst part isn't that we don't understand. It's that we do. Deep down, in a place we don't like to visit, we know. We know we're not as safe as we pretend. We know the world is stranger than we allow ourselves to believe. And we know that some things, once they notice you, never really let you go. So sleep well, or try to. And remember, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. Watching, waiting, until next time.